So this is a case of influenza. I just remind you how the influenza, the flu virus is. So this is the virus. Inside is the genetic material, which is in several bits here. And at the surface of the virus, you have two kinds of proteins called hemagglutinin and neuraminidase, hence the initials H and N. So when these molecules are very important to allow the virus to adhere to cells and penetrate the cells and start the disease. So if you are young and healthy and you are infected by this virus, you start by being sick, but your immune system responds and you start making antibodies which will actually recognize those proteins here, stick to them, and prevent the virus from infecting the cells. So if in the second time you find the same virus, you are already ready, you know how to make these antibodies, and you immediately inactivate the virus and you don't get flu. When you are not as young and sometimes not as healthy, it's good to be vaccinated. And to be vaccinated, you are injected this virus but dead. So this dead virus will induce the immune system to make antibodies, so that if you find the virus, you will be already protected. So you think this is perfect, but there is one big problem. One small problem, one big problem. The small problem is that this virus mutates very easily. And each year, there are mutations which appear, which modify slightly these molecules, H and N. And there are modifications which are slight, but progressively, year after year, it's more and more modified. And after a few years, even if you had antibodies against a strain of virus, 5 years later, those antibodies won't recognize the virus because it evolved slightly, and then you won't be protected. And this is one of the reasons why, when you are vaccinated, you have to be vaccinated actually each year. So that's a small problem, but it is a problem. The big problem is that, in fact, there is not only one flu virus. There are different strains of flu viruses in different animals, and especially in birds. And this is what happened, for instance, in 1918, during the famous Spanish epidemics. In fact, there was a virus that was coming from birds and probably ducks, and this virus infected human beings. And the H and N molecules of this bird virus are very different from the one we are used to see in the human population. So it infected people, and there nobody in the population had antibodies, and a very large number of people were infected. So not only this virus had H and N molecules not recognized, but also it was a very deadly virus. And this is why it made so many victims, you see, 20 to 50 million. So this is what's coming directly from bird. In this case, in 1957, it was a somewhat smaller epidemic, but it was more complicated. There it involved pigs. It so happened that pigs can be infected by duck viruses or avian viruses. It can also be infected by human viruses. And if a pig is infected by both, then you can have a recombinant virus, which is half avian and half human. So in this case, it had the H and N molecules from a duck, and so these were not recognized by human population. There was no protection, but at the same time, it had the ability to easily diffuse against the human population, and this gave these big epidemics. And the same thing happened in 1968. In the H1N1 case, it was a case similar to this one. Apparently, it was no, just a second. H1N1 was more complicated. It was a hybrid between a pig virus, an avian virus, and a human virus. And so people were terrified. This is a totally new kind of flu virus. We have a terrible situation. Fortunately, as I said at the beginning, it was not too deadly, and so many people were, probably most of the human population was infected by this virus, but only a very small proportion of the people infected actually got sick, and so it was not so terrible. And I think the H7 and 9 would be also of the same kind here. So in fact, we still have, it is probably the biggest danger that we face concerning infectious disease among the viruses which have been known so far. For instance, take the H5N1, the H5, lost now, the avian virus, H5, which number it is? You have H5N1, I think. Anyway, the one of 2003. This is a virus which is not at all recognized by human population, so it is very dangerous. I think there were about 600 people who were contaminated, and there was a 50% mortality rate. So it was H5N1, that's it. 50% mortality rate, which is enormous. But the nice thing is that it is not transmitted from human to human. So all the people who got the virus got it directly from birds. So many of them died, but it's only 600 people. And it's not transmitted. Why is it not transmitted from man to man? There is apparently one reason, which is rather simple. It may not be the only one. When you are infected by the normal human virus, like H1N1, the infection concerned the lungs, but also this part, the trachea. And because of this infection here, you cough. And if you are not polite, you cough, and you have someone in front of you who gets the disease. If you are polite, you put your hand, and then you shake hands. So you transmit the virus anyway. So this is the way it's transmitted, apparently. But in the case of H5N1, there is only infection of the lungs and not of the upper aerial trachea. And therefore, you don't cough, and because you don't cough, you don't transmit the virus. But it might take only a small number of mutations for this H5N1 to be transmissible, to infect those cells. And then that would be a real catastrophe. It probably will never happen, but it is conceivable that it might happen. So this is why it is really the most fearful menace at this point. Well, again, there are many other examples of adaptation. I mentioned the Chikungunya epidemics in La Réunion, in the Indian island. There was an adaptation of the virus to a new mosquito. It is transmitted by a certain species of mosquito, and there is a species of mosquito called Albopictus in La Réunion, which normally is not a good vector for this virus. But the virus mutated in such a way that it could be transmitted by the local virus, and this is why there was this big epidemic. So again, it is adaptation. This is mosquitoes.